let me begin by saying how this all came about. So it's been on ISIS Thailand's agenda to do a Surin Pitsuwan tribute sometime this year. And some weeks ago, Ambassador Abdelilah El Housni of Morocco came to me and we had a discussion, and he had the same idea because he was very grateful for Dr. Surin's advice, guidance. Dr. Surin was instrumental in opening the Thai embassy in Morocco, giving Morocco a lot of advice about ASEAN. So we decided to co-host this forum. That's how it came about. I also would say that last week there was a similar Surin Pitsuwan tribute in Washington, D.C. In Washington, D.C., organized by the Asia Foundation with attendance and speeches from Madeleine Albright, William Cohen, former secretaries of State and Defense. And it was also a very memorable tribute. And let me just draw on that by saying that Kun Chuan Lik Pai was the head of Thai delegation. And so Kun Chuan, in his interview comments, he said, I took away two things. First, he said that Surin Pitsuwan didn't start wearing shoes, and still he was a bit grown up, which meant that he came from very humble origins. And we have his son here, by the way. Would you stand up, Housni? Housni Pitsuwan. Dr. Surin has three promising, bright young sons. Fuadi is at Oxford doing a PhD. Housni has a legal background. He's a lawyer, corporate lawyer, and the youngest son, Fitri, is doing a PhD at Cornell. So Kun Chuan said, he didn't wear shoes until he was a bit grown up. And that meant that, he came from very modest origins. And then the second thing Kun Chuan said about Surin, and Kun Chuan has known Surin from the beginning, his political career in the 1980s, that Surin had a gift for language, for the English language. And he got himself through many different doors initially from language, from writing as well, not just his verbal skills, but also his written skills. And that got him many opportunities. And those opportunities he capitalized on, he seized, and he made something of them. So we see Surin today, we didn't think that he didn't wear shoes until some years. So I would say, in a point-blank way, that Surin was too good in my book. I mean, in the mid-80s, I first encountered Dr. Surin because he wrote something about the lame duck in Thai. Lame duck, the U.S. presidency, when they're heading to the election, they don't have much more time left, so they become lame duck. So he used that analogy, that metaphor for Thai politics, which I remember very well. We'll have some speeches and some remarks from our distinguished speakers about Dr. Surin's past in the 1980s. He straddled many different arenas, and he was an academic, he was a lecturer, he was a journalist, he wrote profusely. Of course, he later became a politician, became a minister, cabinet minister, and then he worked in international organizations. As you know, he was Secretary General of ASEAN. But in my book, he was too good for Thailand. He deserved to be Prime Minister of Thailand. Didn't quite get there. He was too good for ASEAN in a way. He should have been the United Nations Secretary General. He didn't quite get there. So in the end, I think it was a bit tragic because he was Thailand's national asset. He was our, I think, very rare statesman of that caliber, of that stature, who could engage on the stage. And he was a man for the stage, I tell you. Surin Pitsuwan could wing it like none other. And Kun Kawi will attest to this. We have been on many public speaking occasions, normally coming after him, right? He's not a man for notes, I mean, he's dry as on the stage, and then he will just speak. And he needs a podium, by the way. He needs a microphone because he has a lot to say, and he's very charismatic. He was a born leader. At the end of it, when I last had a conversation with him in November, after getting messages on the line, social media, he asked me about his latest aspiration to be Bangkok governor, and we have the former Bangkok governor, his longtime colleague here, Sukhumbhand Paribatra. I'll introduce him in a minute. And I said, I was one of those, very few I think, who disagreed. I said, don't do Bangkok governorship. It's a poison chalice. It's not good. You got to be bigger. You should be running Thailand. Form another party. That was our last conversation. So he was too good in so many different ways for Thailand, for ASEAN, and so on. But in the end, he didn't mind. He didn't mind working for ASEAN. And we'll hear something about that later on. Look, I now would like to start to introduce our speakers. Please, I think you have the program, so we'll have a list, and I'll ask our speakers to not exceed, as I mentioned, 8 to 10 minutes. Surin Pitsuwan never said no to ASEAN forums, and especially he never said no to ISIS Thailand. When you ask him to speak, he's super busy. His secretary, his PA here, Kunan will know. I have to talk to her. Hey, Kunan, can you get him to speak at certain time? And of course, he'll come back and he'll say yes. And I think our first speaker to kick off will know this very well, how he's always accommodating, forthcoming, forthright. But he does so many things for different people and organizations in many different ways. So he's touched so many lives. Ajahn Suchit Bunbongkarn, Professor Suchit Bunbongkarn is a chairperson of ISIS Thailand board. He is a very familiar man on campus. He's been on this campus a long time. He is a emeritus professor of political science, but also a former dean, 2 terms of the Faculty of Political Science. He also was also former director of ISIS Thailand twice as well, in addition to having a public role as a constitution drafter for the 1997 Constitution, and also, of course, most distinguished during his time as a judge of the Constitutional Court.
Good morning, Excellencies, distinguished guests and speakers, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Chulalongkorn Universities and the Faculty of Political Science and the Institute of Security and International Study, ISIS Thailand, I would like to extend my warm welcome to all who have gathered here to pay tribute to our beloved Dr. Surin Pitsuwan, former Secretary General of ASEAN, whose untimely passing about 2 years ago was a shock to us all. You remember when we heard that he suddenly depart from this world to the heavens, I was quite saddened. So this tribute has been made possible with the support of the Chulalongkorn University Faculty of Political Science, of which the Dean, Dr. Ek Tangsapathana, joined us here, and His Excellency El Housni, Ambassador of the Kingdom of Morocco. I would like to express my appreciation to His Excellency and his embassy for their generous financial support. May I extend my appreciation to one of the co-founders of ISIS. He happened to be here today. He is the Momrachawong Sukhumbhand Paribatra, former governor of Bangkok. He is the co-founder of ISIS some 30 years ago. I'm glad that now you are back. Welcome back to ISIS. I first know Dr. Surin when he joined Thammasat University's Faculty of Political Science as a junior scholar after receiving a PhD in political science from Harvard. Too bad he didn't join Chula. He decided to go back to his alma mater. He attend Faculty of Political Science Thammasat as a freshman before got a scholarship to study at the Claremont Men's College. He received a bachelor's degree there in political science before continue for his graduate studies in political science and Middle East study at Harvard University. So he very loyal to Thammasat in a way. Thanks for Thammasat. He has shown himself to be an energetic and a bright and serious-minded young political scientist. His academic interest, though focused on Thailand, didn't end there. He had a vision and gave much time and effort, igniting the interest of the Thai academicians and policymakers as to the potential significant role that the Muslim world could play in the international arena. I remember very well when he was a junior faculty member at Thammasat, he went to Afghanistan to get the first-hand information of what was going there, and came back and wrote a nice piece of report in the Thai English newspaper. I'm not very sure either Bangkok Post or The Nation, but I presume The Nation. Maybe Khun Kavi can confirm this. So he had played a valued role in international arena long before he became Foreign Minister of Thailand and Secretary General of ASEAN. When Dr. Surin decided to leave the academic world and join in politics, I was rather disappointed because scholars turned politicians in the case of Thailand were likely to meet with failure. But I was wrong. Dr. Surin was one among a very few former scholars like Ajahn Sukhumbhand and Ajahn Supachai. You did well in politics after you left the academic world. So Dr. Surin as well, he did very well when he became politician. He was a very success in his political life. Not only did he win every election in which he ran, particularly in Nakhon Si Thammarat, his hometown, he also proved himself a political leader with integrity, honesty, dedication, and far-sightedness. He performs excellent both as an elected politician and foreign minister. In year 2007, the Thai Ministry of Foreign Affairs was in the process of nominating a candidate for the post of ASEAN Secretary General, succeeding Ong Keng Yong. They were sought who would be the most suitable candidates for Thailand to be submitted for the cabinet for approval. At that time, I was sitting on the National Legislature's Foreign Relations Committees as Deputy Chair. We were asked by the MFA to nominate one. Dr. Surin was our first choice, but the argument against him was that he might be overqualified as he was a former foreign minister before. A career diplomat would be suitable enough from the point of view of many people, both in the MFA and outside. However, we decided to nominate Dr. Surin, and the government approved our nomination. We believe that if we wanted to reinvigorate the ASEAN Secretariat, we need a person like him. We need a person who was proactive in doing this position. So I think that we had no regret nominating him as the Secretary General of ASEAN. Well, I could spend much more time here citing Dr. Surin's achievement. However, all speakers present here are more competent than I in doing so. Let me end my remarks by asking all of you here to join me in observing a moment of silence in memory of Dr. Surin Pitsuwan.
Good morning, everyone. อาจารย์สุจิตบุญบงการอาจารย์ทิตินันท์พงศ์สุทธิรักษ์อาจารย์สุขุมพันธ์บริพัตร Ambassador El Housni from Morocco, ambassadors from different countries attending the special tribute to be paid to Dr. Surin, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, and dear colleagues and friends. I don't have any prepared statement or speech for a person like Dr. Surin. And this is not a eulogy. It's not a eulogy for him. I'm sure that somehow, somewhere in this room, Dr. Surin is still around with us, coming back to visit all of you who have been kind enough to become people that he has associated himself with as friends, as colleagues, professional friends, people whom he has helped before. It's very difficult to describe Dr. Surin as a foreign minister, as an humanitarian expert, great negotiators, great eloquent orator. But I would like to describe him as a global diplomat. As a global diplomat. He can really actually bulldoze through difficult sessions that I have seen in my own country with different cabinet meetings, ASEAN meetings, meetings associated with international fora like the ASEAN, APEC, UN-related committees and commissions that Dr. Surin has been tasked with. He's really a global diplomat because when he became ASEAN Secretary General, I always had to shy with him that I never saw him in ASEAN, in any of the ASEAN member countries at all. I saw him in Japan, I saw him in Washington, I saw him in Geneva, I saw him in Davos, I saw him in India, I saw him all over the places. And he called me from all over the world, being in so many places at one time until the very last year. Last year was the 50th anniversary of ASEAN, and it was so ironic and so sad, so depressing to see someone which would have meant so much when we had to celebrate the milestone of ASEAN to be passing on. In fact, last year I lost two of my, I would say, closest comrades in arms. One was Dr. Surin, whom I would say a little bit more, and I will allow more time for you to speak because I cannot say everything I have because Surin and I, we've been associated for the last at least 30 years, at least, because we started our political career same year in 1986 when we ran for elections, national elections in the name of the Democratic Party. And since then, Surin never left the party. I left the party on and off, but always been associated with Surin. But another friend of mine who's been doing a lot of work along similar line and has passed on. I have to mention him because he's somebody that I'm sure Dr. Surin would have known him. I have never checked with him, but this is Professor Jean-Pierre Lehmann. Jean-Pierre Lehmann was a Swiss professor having his chair at the International Institute of Management Development in Lausanne, the IMD in Lausanne. Jean-Pierre Lehmann is more Asian than Swiss. He had a lot of, particularly I mentioned him because it was last year that he also passed away, just close to the time of passing away of Dr. Surin. But he has a special passion for ASEAN. Before he passed away, he left a few notes. One of the notes that he left mentioned two specific concerns that he had with ASEAN, which you all know, of course, but I just mentioned because it came from a person like Jean-Pierre Lehmann. Jean-Pierre Lehmann was known especially as a leader of the so-called ASEAN group, if you know ASEAN group. ASEAN group is a group that supported free and fair trade. And Jean-Pierre was one of my advisors when I was at the WTO, and he organized a lot of meetings to support the negotiations going on around the world. And he always supported those who negotiate from a weaker positions, those who need to have the kind of equitable allocation of benefits. Because you cannot go to negotiation and say you negotiate with strength. But Jean-Pierre would always support a poor country. Jean-Pierre said two things, and I have mentioned to you because these are things that are going to be related to what I say about Dr. Surin briefly. One thing, he said he was very concerned with the geopolitical equation in Southeast Asia, particularly linked to the emergence of new powers. Secondly, he has been observing ASEAN in the last 30, 40 years. He came to Asia, working in Japan, must have been 30 years ago, Jean-Pierre. He wrote many things about Asian economies and geopolitical affairs. He said, second thing is that what I feel with ASEAN was that even after 50 years of ASEAN, he wrote this article in celebration of 50th anniversary of ASEAN. He said, I don't sense a feeling that ASEAN feels that they belong in the same group of countries, the same regional group as one. They don't, he said he doesn't feel belonging. And he said, without feeling that you belong to the same group, you are united as one, it's easy to go in different directions. This is what he feared. I'm saying this particularly the second point because it was Dr. Surin, actually, who made the second point one of his major legacy that I think that he is left with ASEAN. I think of all the Secretary Generals all of them have been doing great jobs for ASEAN. Surin was the one who actually not only trying to personify the image of ASEAN with him and with all of us, but he tried to project the image of us being together and being together not only for the good of ourselves, but for the good of the rest of the world. I will not go on very long, but I would say that when he was actually trying to reform the Secretariat, ASEAN Secretariat, he reformed it in a way that he can leave the network, he can have a close network within the Secretariat, that he can leave the Secretariat in place while he travels the world to connect ASEAN with the rest of the world. So he actually acquired strength for ASEAN by seeking friends and allies around the world for ASEAN. One day when we were together at the World Economic Forum meeting in Davos, he was seated there with, I think, the Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong from Malaysia, President, I think it was Aquino from the Philippines, and several of the ASEAN leaders. And Surin was the last to speak. And then Klaus Schwab asked Surin to say in a sentence, what is it that is ASEAN to the world? Surin stood up and he said, look, you look around the world today and you see so many regions in the world that become such a burden to us. Because we were talking about Europe going apart with the Greek problem, the problems of immigrations and all these other things. He said the world is going apart. But I can assure you one thing, that ASEAN will never be a burden to all of you. Will never be a burden to all of you. I think it's a very touching and signifying moment, because everybody was worrying of all these groupings, that they always create things. They are not really being more and more integrated. They are becoming less and less integrated and disintegrated in some areas. So that was what he said at that time. Within ASEAN, as you can see, one of the things that Japan became so grateful to ASEAN at the time of the great tsunami in Japan, I think it was in 2010, Surin made it his own effort to go around all ASEAN capitals to say things to the leaders of all these ASEAN member countries that we have to do something to help Japan at the moment. This is the moment that you make friends. You help people in need, you make real friends. So he rallied support coming from ASEAN in terms of physical support, in terms of trade support, tariff reduction, facilitation of trade with Japan, to make Japan feel that they are not left alone. And he rallied this behind. When I was in the UN after the WTO, I know at the time that there was, I think, the great typhoon Nargis, destroying most of the areas, a lot of areas in Myanmar. And we were not allowed to go in, because Myanmar never trusted UN, I can say that. But Myanmar trusted someone like Dr. Surin. So what we did at that time was that Secretary General Ban Ki-moon actually called up Dr. Surin and asked him to be our special coordinator for the UN, so that both ASEAN and UN can go into Myanmar to just provide the assistance coming from around the world. And that was actually done successfully with the intervention of Dr. Surin. I have many more things to say, but I don't want to take up more than the time allocated to all of us. I say two more things that I would remember him very well. Just cite a little bit, one little piece of thoughts that he used to leave with us. He said, look, you can see how we thrive on diversity in ASEAN. I said, what is that? What is your example? He said, look at the dispute around Prasad Pravihan. Prasad Pravihan. He said, this is a dispute between two Buddhist states. Dispute between two Buddhist states over a Hindu temple. Over a Hindu temple. And to be interlocated by a Muslim, because it was an Indonesian minister who helped us in trying to intermediate between Thailand and Cambodia. This is, he said, you cannot imagine anywhere in the world that you would have this kind of an amalgamation of culture around a single issue. So this is Dr. Surin. Two things as my last two remarks. One remark was that at the very critical time of Asia in 1997-98, when we came into the government to resolve the financial crisis in those days, it was a very dark days, particularly for us in Thailand. We had a lot of debts, and we could not repay all this debt. One of the debts we had and supposed to be having was the planned purchase of a squadron of F-16 jet fighters. That's why I saw, and Dr. Titinan just mentioned the presence of former Secretary Cohen at this meeting last week in Washington, D.C. with Asian Foundation in memory of Dr. Surin. It was at that time that Dr. Surin took upon himself to negotiate with the United States, particularly to go back on the long-standing relationship, and particularly the F-16 squadron was ordered before our time, before Kun Chuan came in as a prime minister. But we had to actually cancel the order, and the order was already done years ago. But we don't have the billions of dollars to pay for the squadron. We were the government in those days that came into the crisis, trying to resolve the crisis by cutting down on the expenditures, not to cut down on any expenditures that are related to social affairs, not on education, not on health, but we make a deep cut on defense expenditure. And one of the cuts on defense expenditures was made through the intervention by Dr. Surin in negotiating with Secretary Cohen. So much so that ultimately the US actually canceled the purchase and canceled the money that was placed in guarantee to be used for this purchase of the plane. And so it helped us, maybe in a small way, but it was very significant. It was very a defining moment for the country that we could achieve this with a kind of negotiation that Dr. Surin had. In negotiating for the successful establishment of the ASEAN Charter, one of the strong critics of the ASEAN Charter was United States, because they have their own constitution. Hillary Clinton one day came into the office of Dr. Surin. She said, well, look, I don't see any way you can do this. I mean, ASEAN been around for so long and you never have anything in common. So how can you explain to me that you can execute the plan to implement this constitution? Surin said, look, I mean, Madam Secretary, you have Thomas Jefferson. You remember the kind of declaration of interdependence. Every man, or I don't know, was born equal, with equal rights and this and that. He said, and Thomas Jefferson never mentioned African American. He never mentioned gender equality. We do everything in here. He said, look, with your constitution, you see today President Obama as President of the United States, and you see today that you yourself, as a first female Secretary of State for the United States. And this is how we perceive our own constitution, that it would give this kind of leveling, equalizing rights to everyone on board. And this is how I see it would happen. During the critical period after the threatened demise of the multilateral system, the failures of the Seattle World Trade Organization meeting in Seattle, it was a complete debacle. People were moving apart. There was no way that we could regroup people together. And it was in the year 2000, the year 1999. It was in the year 1999 that there was a total disruption of the trade around the world. We in Thailand were tasked to host the UNCTAD meeting, UNCTAD number 10, in the year 2000. I was co-chairing the meeting with Mr. Recupero from UNCTAD, and Dr. Surin was my deputy chair. That was the meeting. If you go back and read the Bangkok Declaration, that was the Bangkok Declaration that actually regrouped all of our countries together to be pushing forward for a new multilateral trade round. It was at Bangkok in 2000 that led to the 2001 launching of the Doha Agenda. Successful or not successfully negotiated at the moment, still not yet concluded, but at least we have come back and grouped together as a multilateral effort. It was Dr. Surin who actually negotiated the major parts of the Bangkok Declaration that gave rise to the need for multilateral solutions and maintain the vibrancy, maintain the significance of the multilateral solutions for our global issues. He did it using a lot of negotiating day and night, and he was doing that while I was chairing the meeting, and he did it perfectly. Last thing, because of me, I didn't want to mention it from the beginning, but one of the proudest moments of Dr. Surin, and again, another of my dear colleague and friend, Dr. Sukhumbhand here, was that he was very pleased, and he said it many times, and we were going around lecturing together. One of his proudest moments, it was when Madeleine Albright, who was also last week in Washington, and Madeleine talked very, very kindly about Dr. Surin, for which I am so proud of. Madeleine said of Dr. Surin, I think last week, that he is the champion of international cooperation. But Dr. Surin felt himself very proud that some moments in 1999, when he was actually campaigning together with Dr. Sukhumbhand on my behalf for my candidacy at the World Trade Organization, Madeleine Albright called him from her plane, a special plane, United States plane. Madeleine Albright was going from Washington to Helsinki to negotiate on the question of Serbia, the wars, hostilities going on there. But she took care that she phoned Dr. Surin to offer a solution for the kind of race that seems to be unending. She said, to hell with the two of them, to hell with Supachai and Mike Moore. Let's get rid of them and start with a new one because I cannot live with them anymore. Let's have a new process. Surin said, calm down, Madam Secretary. He said, if you do that, you come up with a third candidate, the world will see this as a failure. You will be a failure, we'll be a failure, everyone will be a failure. So let's persist and let's agree on something. And it was again Dr. Surin who actually negotiated for a sharing of term that actually was concluded as a kind of the first and unique arrangement at the level of the United Nations in multilateral system. When we saw each other one of the last time at a breakfast hosted by another friend of our, Ambassador Ivo Stieber from Switzerland, when a common friend of our former federal President Joseph come in during the funeral of our last king. Surin turned to me before we left the breakfast and he said, Pete, call me brother, Pete, I'm worried about the political situation in Thailand. Everyone is looking for a new leader here and there. They're looking at me also as a new leader. They're looking at him, me meaning Dr. Surin. And many of them try to, by words of mouth, appoint him as the next leader. He said, Pete, don't be misled by all this, because these are people who have no authority at all to do any appointment of all of us. They say things like this, so don't go and believe them all. These are the kind of humble things that Dr. Surin used to say, that he knows that this is the thing that he would be aspiring to be the next Bangkok governor, for example. The meeting that we had together with a group of people when he first announced that, also, he had that aspiration, but he doesn't want the world to be actually surprised and to be misled by somebody else who tried to appoint him this and that, because he actually tried to work his way and to gain acceptance from the people, and people like you who actually made him very happy in being his friends, his colleagues, and working with him throughout all his years. And then he always remembered all of us very well. And this is the kind of person that he is. When Secretary Cohen at the last week meeting, he said, Surin is not only a great man, he's also a very good man. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is a great honor, albeit tinged with a great sense of sadness and loss, for me to be here to join in this tribute to Dr. Surin Pitsuwan and his life's achievements, especially where ASEAN is concerned. All of us here, as well as Dr. Surin's many friends, colleagues, and admirers the world over, were shocked by the suddenness of his passing away. Indeed, less than 2 weeks before, I had the rare pleasure of being with him and spending a couple of wonderful hours with him, totally devoid of any talks of politics or diplomacy. Very rare indeed. At that time, he was a picture of good health and humor, and this made it all the more difficult to cope with what happened not many days afterwards. Dr. Surin, both as Thailand's Minister of Foreign Affairs and ASEAN Secretary General, contributed greatly to the progress and development of regionalism in Southeast Asia. And it is entirely appropriate that the Institute of Security and International Studies, ISIS, Thailand, chose to honor him with this gathering. For some 30 years ago, and perhaps not many of us would remember, Dr. Surin was present at the creation of ISIS, sitting on the executive board and helping the Institute through the early challenging years. He was then at Thammasat University, but he was still very happy to help Chulalongkorn University for a good cause. But then this was the real Dr. Surin for you, always someone with an enlightened sense of the public good and public responsibility. Many of the distinguished participants here are much more qualified than I to pay tribute to Dr. Surin and his contributions to ASEAN. I've been immersed in urban politics and administration for too long to give a meaningful appraisal of his achievements. But as one who had known him for over 30 years, as a friend and big brother, as a scholar and as an academic colleague, and as a fellow MP and Foreign Affairs boss, perhaps I can share some perspectives and insights which would enhance our appreciation of who he was, and what he did. Many terms have been used to encapsulate Dr. Surin and his diplomacy: visionary, idealistic, proactive, internationalist, and so on. And all of them would be accurate. But what really struck me most about him throughout the years was consistency. Consistency of beliefs and consistency of purpose. From the time that he was a barefooted schoolboy in rural Nakhon Si Thammarat, he was a Democrat, both with a small d and a big D. Indeed, he took his Thai name out of great admiration for Surin Masadit, a well-known and well-respected Democrat Party MP from his home province. From the beginning, Dr. Surin was a patriot and was committed to public service, first as a young academic teaching at Thammasat University, and then as Democrat Party MP. But his sense of patriotism and conception of public service were never narrowly defined. He believed that the pursuit of his country's national interest can only be fully effective through interfacing and cooperating with the outside world, and that public service must involve responsibility beyond one's own borders both territorial and religious. This is why, from his early years till his very last days, he took interest and got himself involved in so many issues, all of them related to international peace, prosperity, and justice. It was not coincidental that in the early aftermath of the Paris Peace Agreement in 1991, when many had thought that the idea of a Southeast Asia 10 was but a pipe dream, Dr. Surin, along with a number of Southeast Asian colleagues from both government and academia, chose to conceive their individual countries' long-term security as being inextricably intertwined with the establishment of region-wide cooperation. I would like to think, to this day, I would like to think that Dr. Surin's and his colleagues' early advocacy of a Southeast Asia 10 led to Vietnam's membership of ASEAN as early as 1995, with the remaining 3 regional states, Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar, also becoming members soon after. Nor was it coincidental that in 1999, when the situation in the then East Timor worsened, Minister of Foreign Affairs Surin lost no time in convincing Prime Minister Chun Lik-pai that Thailand should be in the forefront of international peacekeeping efforts there. In the topsy-turvy world of Thai politics, this kind of enlightened consistency of thought and actions and purpose was rare. For myself, one regret was that it was not often appreciated at the time. Indeed, during the East Timor crisis, Dr. Surin and the Chuan government were heavily criticized for, I don't know how to translate into English, but were criticized, heavily criticized for being serving dogs of the West. Another regret was that Dr. Surin did not have an opportunity to demonstrate his vision and his enlightened sense of public service on the global stage as the Secretary General of the United Nations, where his stature as a moderate Muslim might have made a real difference in the relations between the Islamic world and the rest. The story of why he did not become UN or did not have a chance to become UN Secretary is a long one, and this is not the time or place to retell the story. Suffice to say that the UN's loss was ASEAN's gain. Dr. Surin's predecessors and successors, I'm certain, predecessors and successors as ASEAN Secretary, I'm certain, might all be consummate diplomats with enormous experiences of regional and global affairs. But I believe that no one has led a kind of storied life like Dr. Surin had done, bringing flair, excitement, and a sense of optimism to everything he touched. Rest in peace, Dr. Surin Pitsuwan, friend and brother. Rest in peace, Dr. Surin Pitsuwan, diplomat without borders. We miss you. It remains for us to make sure that your legacies live on and that your enlightened patriotism and sense of public service will inspire the younger generations for many, many more years to come. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. Good morning, everyone. Peace be upon you. I'm really humbled to be here, seeing such a distinguished lineup speaking at his tribute. And I'm very grateful for the family who insisted that I speak today, not just as someone who's worked with him, but as a friend and a sister. There's so many things to talk about Surin, and all of you will have wonderful stories about his diplomatic career. But let me tell you about my brother, Abdul Halim Surin Pitsuwan. I've known him close to 20 years and been such an admirer of his work. But where we really got close was in the aftermath of Cyclone Nargis. At the time, I was deployed by the United Nations Disaster Assessment Coordination Team as its team leader. And being an ASEAN citizen and having a diplomatic passport, thanks to my government, I was able to come in and lead the team. We knew then there was a lot of challenges, there was a lot of mistrust, and there was a lot of difficulty in getting the international community in. It is then when I actually, in my small capacity as the team leader, spoke to the head of OCHA to say, reach out to Dr. Surin. And the rest is history, which I think Noeleen and others will speak about. One of the things Surin is excellent as a leader is his ability to listen, and his ability to listen to anyone. He didn't care whether you were the state leader or just someone who was a staff or a volunteer. He would listen to advice. I met him a few weeks later in Bangkok, and I sat down with him and I said, you've seen now in the aftermath of these disasters how local organizations and local communities actually gather to attend to the needs of people. It's not the international community that comes in first. And therefore, it's really important to invest in people, invest in local communities and organizations. And ASEAN had no history of a very strong civil society relationship at the time. Surin then said, well, let's create one. And then we gathered a couple of friends, And Oxfam, Great Britain, seconded 2 staff to the ASEAN Secretariat. And that was the beginning of what was then the ASEAN Partnership Group, which has now been formalized to be the ASEAN ADMA Partnership Group, which has civil society playing an important role in discussing the importance of disaster preparedness and response. And I think if it was not for his vision and his ability to listen, this would never have happened. The barriers of mistrust between civil society and government slowly crumbled away, particularly in the management of disasters in the region. But I think above all, Surin was very troubled. He saw Myanmar as the cyclone as a real opportunity to open up dialogue, and he was right. But many years later, or rather not even many years later, 4 or 5 years later, he called me, he said, we need to meet again because there is another crisis looming that I think we need to think about. And right until a few weeks before he died, his last message to me was, what is ASEAN doing about the Rakhine situation? What are we doing about the Rohingya crisis? Tell me what's going on. And then I had to reach out to Adelina Kamal, his very trusted director, to ask for details about what ASEAN was doing and send him a message to say, here's the assistance that's been delivered. Surin was passionate about education. His great love was Pondok Bantan in his village. And he took me there together with Adelina, and he said, speak to the girls, speak to the girls. Make sure you speak to all these students because you are a Muslim yourself, just like me. And you need to tell them to look at us in a different way, that we can be global players. You need to continue, he said. And I think, we all are humbled because he put so much responsibility on us to be able to also stand on a global platform and speak about global issues, and that all the stereotypes would then fall away. I think I would be remiss if I didn't thank his family. He was a great son, a loving husband, a loving father, a loving brother, and a loving uncle, or whatever, to his family. Last night, as I visited his grave and his family, I said to his wife, Sister Alisa, thank you for sharing Surin with us. And she said, I always knew I had to share him with the rest of the world. And I'm glad I did. So to the family, thank you very much for sharing him with us, because I think we've all become richer because we knew Surin. In my last meeting with him in Geneva, I saw him as very tired. And I sat him down and I said, you look terribly tired, and I think you've got to stop flying around so much. And I asked him, what will be your legacy? What will be your legacy? And he smiled, his usual grin there. And he said to me, why worry about the legacy? I just carry on working. And I worried about it because we are the ones in this room who knew Surin and loved Surin, but there are many others who will come after us who may not know him. So I urged the family yesterday to make sure that a biography is written about his life. I also urge them to think about ways we can actually ensure his legacy lives on beyond us in this room. But I think 2 things which he said to me, which are really important. One of them was actually in the fringes of the G20. And he said, the G20, they're good at putting out fires. They're not so good at replanting trees. How do we make sure that regional organizations and groupings can replant trees? And this was his firm belief in young people. And one of the things that he was absolutely delighted with was the ASEAN Youth Caravan that actually went down to Myanmar in the delta of Irrawaddy after the cyclone Nargis. So we'll all remember Surin in many ways. I remember him as this very funny man who did not know how to work an ATM machine, who had to borrow 50 pounds from me in the middle of a plane flight to London. He was sitting in business class and he told the stewardess, my sister is in economy, can you get her up here? And he told the stewardess, she's my sister, please let her sit with me and please give her a coffee at the same time. And we sat and he whispered to me, he says, I don't have any cash and I need to get to Oxford. And I said, sure, let me give you £50. And he said, take a photo with me, so it's evidence that I've borrowed money from you. And I did. And he said, isn't it crazy? You know, I get pampered. Everyone does everything for me. I don't know the PIN of my ATM. So Surin, that £50 is yours. You know, there are funny sides to a man who we see as such a great leader. But more than all, he was a beautiful human being. We will all miss him. And we'll all love him, and we'll carry on doing what he's done in our own different ways. So thank you very much for giving me the time.